You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hello, I'm Carl Say at Puma Podcast and you're listening to Teka Teka News. Naaalala mo pa ba yung Yolanda? Remember how the term storm surge was said to have been lost in translation? In other words, hindi naintindihan ng komunidad kung ano bang ibig sabihin nun. A decade later, kumusta ang science literacy natin? Nagkakaintindihan na ba tayo?
An evil expert, a mad intellectual, a helpless victim, a hermit prodigy, a foolish professor, and a heroic creator.
That was Professor Gary Montemayor from the Department of Science Communication, College of Development Communication at UP Los Baños. He spoke at a recent public lecture on the state of science communication in the Philippines. Sabi niya, ganyan daw ang karaniwang pagportray ng pop culture sa mga scientist.
The scientist is a middle-aged old male who wears a white lab coat with frizzy, unruly hair, sometimes has an unshaven beard, and wears eyeglasses. And he is surrounded by lab equipment such as test tubes, flasks, and Bunsen burners, or weird machines with flashing lights and dials.
While these depictions have decreased over the last decades, Professor Montemayor says that the way scientists are depicted in our pop culture may reflect our attitudes towards science. Ito daw yung hypothesis.
The exposure to such stereotypical images is assumed to affect and eventually construct the public's perceptions and overall view of science and scientists.
So, is a lack of science literacy the problem? Let's listen to the experts themselves. When we look at a broadsheet or a news website, or those who don't know what a broadsheet is, you can rarely find a section dedicated to science or technology stories, at least here in the Philippines. Madalas daw nasa lifestyle yung mga storya na yun. And more often than not are framed as Pinoy pride stories. Tipong Pinoy scientist discovers XYZ or Pinoy invents ABC. Sabi yan ni science journalist TJ De Macali na siya ring science communication head ng UP College of Science.
Which sections garnered the most traffic? Ano sa palagay nyo ang pinaka-trending? Sports. Ang kasunod niyan, entertainment. Tapos ang kasunod niyan, saka lang papasok yung national news. What we've seen from experience is that science news, when packaged in a lifestyle dimension, yun yung nagte-trend. Human interest stories are always a big item.
Okay, so sumusubaybay naman pala tayo sa science stories. However, TJ says that because it's packaged as lifestyle or human interest stories, we are not culturally conditioned to see it as science stories. So, what works? How do we get people interested in, say, climate change or the discovery of gravitational waves? Ito daw yung gumagana, sabi ni TJ.
You might not have a public that's primed to listen to accept hard science stories. But if they are packaged in a way, mas nagiging palatable siya. Here's a good example of how that packaging works. Itong story na to, which came out many years ago.
At this point, nagpakita si TJ ng isang article. Ang headline, Einstein's last prediction close to confirmation. Tapos, may malaking picture ni Albert Einstein.
So this is a wire story. Hindi to exclusive sa news website namin, but we couldn't change the article, of course. But we did have leeway to adjust the headline and the photo. And surprisingly, nag-pick up siya. Naglibo ka agad yung mga nagbabasa. No? But why is this the case? No? We attribute this to how it was framed. We knew that, especially in the social media setting, ang unang mababasa ng audience mo, na mostly Filipino, is the word Einstein. Hindi naman familiar ang mga Pilipino sa gawa ni Einstein, pero alam nila, uy, genius yan. Pero the next bit also helps to hook the Filipino readers in. No? Last prediction, close to confirmation. And we chose those words very carefully. No? Kasi gusto namin na merong konting kababalaghan na nandun.
Sa madaling sabi, hindi science literacy ang problema. Filipinos are open to hearing and learning about science, especially when it's communicated in a way that's relatable to them. If that's the case, then ano yung problema? Let's talk about that after a short break.
What do you think science communication is all about?
That was Dr. Inez Ponce de Leon from the Ateneo de Manila University. She says that when we think of science communication, we think of charts, graphs, even a map showing the path of an oncoming typhoon.
If you're like me, you might have begun with the following assumptions. Maybe it's there to give information to the lay public. Maybe it's to share data with a layman. Maybe it's to simplify information or translate things into local languages like scientific concepts or scientific frameworks.
Sabi niya, ang dami-dami raw ng datos na hawak ng mga scientist. So ang instinct ay magpalabas ng TARP, magpaprint ng brochure, gumawa ng conference. Kaso, the problem is,
It's actually not communication. It's actually an ad hoc reaction to having something. When we talk about communication, we often think about the message or the way it's transmitted. But there's something missing here. It's people. And science communication, as communication itself, is a social science field. You cannot have the social sciences without people.
and that's it right there. Did you catch that? Again, the problem isn't just science literacy. It's also science communication. Ang kaso, hindi daw communication ang madalas na nangyayari. Instead, it's just giving information. As in, sige, maglabas tayo ng brochure, tapos bahala na. Mahalaga ang tao sa proseso ng communication. And the evidence for that? Balik tayo sa Yolanda.
I did a lot of research, mainly on both science and risk, for communities that experienced Typhoon Haiyan back in 2015. And I asked everyone, how do they understand the warnings? What do they wish were in the warnings? How did they know what to do? In general, there were communities that didn't even need translation. Coron, for instance, didn't want to be told there was a daluyong coming. They said, storm surge. We've always known what that is. Don't give us a translation of the term. We won't understand it. There are also different cultures of knowledge of risk and different understandings of risk because they all depend on maybe how people have experienced storms in the past, what they remember. They also know a lot about storms themselves. They don't have the scientific nomenclature or the vocabulary, but they can tell you the direction of a storm by listening to how a storm howls, by looking at where the winds are blowing. For some communities, they couldn't imagine what a bigger storm would be like. So when they were told it's a signal number 5, even if they'd experienced a signal number 3, they couldn't imagine a worst case scenario.
Okay, so knowing all of this, ano ang conclusion natin dito? First, babalik tayo sa sinabi ni TJ kanina. It's the framing that matters. Can people relate to what is trying to be said? Pangalawa, it's people who should be at the heart of the conversation. Hindi tayo nagbabato lang ng information. Kailangan kinikilala natin kung sino ba ang kinakausap natin. Ano ba ang konteksto nila? Ano na ba ang alam nila? Communication is part of the big problem. It's not just literacy. At dagdag pa ni Dr. Inez,
science literacy is actually not what you know. It's what you have in yourself so that you are willing to keep knowing. It's the ability to ask questions, to be curious. That's important. That is the root of a scientific mindset.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Ako po si Carl Sayat, Puma Podcast. This episode was written by myself. Our audio editor is Pinoy Blanco. Executive producer is Jill Daniel Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uy. If you're watching this on YouTube and you like this episode, please take the time to like and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to follow Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Maraming salamat po.